Hello and welcome to Drunk on Tea. Today, in another episode of the 5 Paint Challenge, I'm going to show you how to paint a Chaos Space Marine using just Abaddon Black, Wraithbone, Death Guard Green, Leadbelcher and Retributor Armour. And this is the model I'm going to be painting up today, Chaos Space Marine, that I'll be painting in the style of the Death Guard. So as always, the first thing I've done is I've primed the model black, because this will give us a nice smooth, even base coat for the rest of our colours to work from. The first colour I'm coming in with is Death Guard Green, and for this I'm going to paint all of the power armour to the Chaos Space Marine. We're going to work in a couple of smooth, thin layers to build up to solid coverage of Death Guard Green all over the power armour. Doesn't matter if we're a little bit messy at this stage, get some Death Guard Green over other areas. Doesn't matter, because we will be coming back in later to paint over all of the other regions. But for now, just work your way around the model in a couple of smooth layers, build up to a solid coat of Death Guard Green all over the power armour. Death Guard Green is going to give us that Nurgle green look to the power armour that's so iconic of Death Guard Space Marines. And as you can see, after a couple of layers of Death Guard Green, I've got a nice smooth, solid, even coat all over that power armour. So next, I'm coming in with some Abaddon Black. Using this, I'm going to paint all of the details, like the undersuit. Obviously being really careful around areas of Death Guard Green we've already painted. But I'll make sure I catch all of the ribbed areas of the undersuit with a couple of layers of Abaddon Black. This will break up that green colour. Focus on that undersuit area and add some definition to the model. I'm also picking out the grenade here on his waist as well. Just catching this with some Abaddon Black. And I'm also going to pick out any of the pipes and cables on the model. So there's a fair few ribbed cables in different areas of the model. So at this stage, I'm just making sure I pick these out with a couple of layers of Death Guard Green, as well as any pouches and gun holsters and things like that. I'm catching these with some Abaddon Black as well. I'm also going to pick out the horns on his helmet. Going to catch these with some Abaddon Black. Obviously being really careful around the Death Guard Green we've already painted. And finally, I'm going to pick out the casing to his bolt rifle as well. Just going to make sure I catch this with a couple of layers. We've got a nice solid black colour for the gun casing. And after picking out all of those black details, it's broken up that Death Guard Green a little bit and added some interest to the model. So next, with some Wraithbone, I'm going to pick out any of the fabric areas on the model. So a lot of these Chaos Space Marine sculpts have got cloth coming down from their waist. So I'm making sure I pick this out with a couple of layers of Wraithbone. Obviously being really careful around all the other colours we've already painted. And this is going to take a couple of layers to build up to solid coverage. We're just working a few thin layers till we get a nice smooth coat of Wraithbone. I'm also picking out any of the straps on the model. So he's got the strapping holding the holster to his leg. I'm going to make sure I catch this with a couple of layers of Wraithbone as well. And the belt as well. I'm going to make sure I catch all of these areas with some Wraithbone. And with the belt as well, I'm going to carefully make sure I pick this out with a couple of layers of Wraithbone. After a couple of layers, you can see we've got a solid coat of Wraithbone all over those fabric areas. So now it's time to pick out any of the metallic details on the model. The first lead I'll be picking out are the ones that I want to be painted with Leadbelcher. So it's going to be areas like the muzzle to the gun, the magazine, all of those details, I'm just picking these out with a couple of layers of Leadbelcher. And there were also some details on the backpack as well, such as vents and things like that. So I'm going to make sure I carefully pick these out with some Leadbelcher as well. Obviously being really careful around all the areas we've already painted with other colours. And with that Leadbelcher applied, there's now just one final base coat left to apply to this Death Guard Space Marine. And that's going to be with some Retributor Armour. I'm going to pick out all of the trim details on the model. So wherever we've got these raised areas of trim around all the panels to the power armour, I'm going to make sure I pick these out with a couple of layers of Retributor Armour, being as neat and as careful as I can around all of the other colours. This is going to take 2 or 3 coats to build up to a solid gold coverage on these details. I'm just making sure I take my time, carefully working my way around the Chaos Space Marine, picking out all of the details of gold trim with a couple of layers of Retributor Armour. If you do make any mistakes at this stage, you can tidy back up with some Death Guard green or any of the other colours. Make sure you're nice and neat as you work your way around. Just pick out all of the details of trim, all the trinkets and things like that as well. Just make sure you catch all of these with some Retributor Armour. Make sure you spend that extra little bit of time and be really neat around the face details, because this will be the focal point of the model. So you really do want to make sure you catch these without making any mistakes where you can. Don't forget details like the large skull here on the backpack and the shoulder pads and things like that. Make sure you catch all of these details with some Retributor Armour. Finally, picking out any of the detailing on the gun as well. This one here's got a skull. Just make sure you pick these out with some Retributor Armour as well. And with all of the trim and trinket details picked out, that is all of the base coats applied to our Death Guard Chaos Space Marine. So now it's time to start shading the miniature. First shade I'm going to apply is a mix of Death Guard green and Abaddon Black. You can see it's about 3 parts Death Guard green to 2 parts Abaddon Black. You don't want this to be too dark. You do want a dirty, grimy, dark green colour. So I'm mixing the 2 paints together on my palette and then adding a lot of water so it flows really smoothly off of my brush. So just keep adding water till you got the paint down to about the consistency of a shade paint. And once you've got the consistency you're happy with, the first thing I'm doing with this mix is I'm applying it as a pin shade on all of the details to the power armour. So I'm following around the trim here, applying a thin little bead of this shade into the recess by all of the details. Try and keep this line nice and small, but if you do come in a little bit too thick, you can tidy up afterwards with some pure Death Guard green. I'm also applying this as a recess shade to all of the other details on the power armour. So wherever there's a joint between a panel, edge of a detail, anything like that, I'm applying a little bit of this shade paint, which is going to sink into those recesses, add some definition to the power armour of our Chaos Space Marine. Much like picking out the trim, this step will take a little while, but it really is worth it, because at the end, after it's all dried, it really does add that definition and makes all the power armour really pop on the model. So just take your time at this stage, work your way around the model and apply this pin shade of this Abaddon Black Death Guard green mix into all of the recesses of all of the details on the power armour. And I'm also applying this as an all over shade to the areas we paint with Wraithbone. So this will sink into those recesses and give that cloth a dirty, grimy look, which is ideal for Death Guard models. And finally, I'm applying this as an all-over shade all over the areas of Retributor Armour as well. Because of the green in this, it's going to give it that dirty verdigris look, which is so iconic for Death Guard. So just make sure you work your way back around the model, applying this as an all-over shade to all the areas we painted with Wraithbone and Retributor Armour. So try and be quite neat at this stage, but if you do get a little bit of this over the power armour, it doesn't matter, just adds that dirty Death Guard look. And now with some pure Abaddon Black, I'm going to make a shade for the Leadbelcher details. So I'm applying some of this to my palette, thinning it down with a lot of water again. If you're not limiting yourself to just 5 paints, you can use Nuln oil for this stage. Just thin the Abaddon Black down, so it's not too strong, flows nice and easily. And then I'm just applying this all over the areas we paint with Leadbelcher. So it'll sink into the recesses, darken these areas down, and add a bit of definition to these metallic areas. So I'm applying it to the gun, the grenade on his belt, and the vents on his backpack. I'm just catching these with a bit of our black wash. If you're enjoying the video, please press like. If you want more videos, press the subscribe button and ring the notification bell. If you would like to support the channel and become a member, please press the join button down below. And after all of those shades have dried, you can see they've added definition all over our Chaos Space Marine, made all of those panels on the power armor pop. So now it's time to start highlighting. First highlight I'm coming in with is some Death Guard green and Wraithbone. So it's about 2 parts Death Guard green to 1 part Wraithbone. You're mixing the 2 colours together to create a lighter green colour. Then going to very carefully apply it as an edge highlight to all of the sharp points on the power armor. So I'm using a small brush here and I'm just picking out the very edges of any of the panels on the power armor, tops of details like his fingers and things like that, and the tops of any rivets that are in the power armor as well. Just making sure I pick these out with a really thin edge highlight of this Death Guard green Wraithbone mix. This step works really well with the pin shade to create definition all over power armor. It gives the impression of light catching the edges of all the sharp surfaces, while the recessed shade gives the impression of shadow in all the deeper areas. So just take your time once again at this stage, work your way around the model, picking out all of the edges to all of the details on the power armor with a thin edge highlight for this mix. If at any point any of your lines were a little bit too thick or you're not happy with them, you can come back in with some pure Death Guard green to paint back over them. But try and keep them as nice and neat and as thin as you can, just catching the sharpest points and most raised edges of the power armor with a highlight for this mix. Don't forget to also highlight the backpack as well, catching those sharp points, tops of the rivets and all of the details with a really thin edge highlight of this Wraithbone Death Guard green mix. And after that highlight's been applied, you can see how it's added definition and brightened up the edges to all of those panels. So the next step, I'm going to paint the eye lenses on the helmet. For this, I'll be using Wraithbone. And I'm just going to very carefully sink some Wraithbone into those eye lenses on the Chaos Space Marine's helmet, being really careful around all the other details, just catching those eye lenses with some Wraithbone. With the eye lenses picked out, it's added some interest to the helmet, given a bit of a focal point to the model. So now it's time to highlight all of the black details. For this I'll be using Abaddon Black and Wraithbone mixed together. About 2 parts Abaddon Black to 1 part Wraithbone. This will create a roughly Mechanica standard grey colour. So I'm mixing the 2 paints together. And now I'm going to carefully highlight all of the details that are black. So for the undersuit, I'm just carefully picking out the raised ridges along all the parts of the undersuit, just catching those with a little bit of this grey mix. I'm also picking out any of the raised details on the black grenade hanging from his waist. Keeping these highlights nice and small, just picking out the raised details with a little bit of this grey mix. So I'm doing the same to all of the pipe work as well, just catching the tops of those raised ridges on the pipes and on the gun holster on his waist. I'm just going to apply a thin edge highlight of this grey mix around the edge of the holster. I'm doing much the same on the horns, catching all of the raised details with a thin edge highlight of this grey. And finally, I'm doing the same to the bolt gun as well. I'm just applying an edge highlight going around all the panels to the casing and the bolt gun, keeping these nice and thin. If I do come in a bit too thick, I'll tidy back up with Abaddon Black. With all the black highlighted, there's just one final highlight left to apply to our Death Guard Space Marine, and that's going to be with some Wraithbone. I'm going to apply an edge highlight to all of the fabric areas. So where we shaded this with that green and black shade, it's created a dirty, rotten look to all of the fabric, which is great for Death Guard. So I'm just applying a little bit of pure Wraithbone on the very edges of all the fabric, catching the sharpest points, tops of any prominent folds or creases. Just going to catch all of these with a little edge highlight of Wraithbone, but making sure I leave that dirty, rotten green look on the rest of the fabric. Doing the same to the strappings as well, just catching the tops and bottoms of any strap with a bit of Wraithbone. And with that highlight applied, there's just one final step left to apply to this Chaos Space Marine, and that's with some Abaddon Black. I'm going to tidy up the base. So when you're tidying up the base, obviously you want to be really careful around the feet. Don't want to accidentally paint these black. And make sure you apply a couple of layers of Abaddon Black all over the top of the base and the rim of the base as well. Just to tidy it up, get rid of any overspill from the painting, and give us a nice solid colour all over the base. So just be careful around the feet and make sure you coat all of the base with a couple of layers of Abaddon Black. And with the base tidied up, that is how to easily paint a Death Guard Chaos Space Marine using just 5 paints. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please let me know in the comments down below, what other Chaos Space Marine legions would you like to see me paint with just 5 paints? Don't forget to like and subscribe, and happy painting!